So, guys, I do want to talk about AEW, and I do want to talk about their issue with special shows. And this has been like really, really hurting the company because right now you have two special shows that you just had AEW All Out, the pay per view, and then you went to AEW Grand Slam, and then now you have AEW fifth anniversary show, and then next week you have AEW Title Tuesday, and then you have Wrestle Dream, and then after Wrestle Dream you have Battle of the Belts, and then you have Full Gear in November. And I do think with Wrestle Dream, it's definitely going to turn into a show where they actually have just a bunch of like put together matches. Like Tony Khan's going to do what he does best, which is he's going to book a bunch of great matches, and we're all going to be really happy. But it's going to be something that's really rushed because they don't have the time. And with AEW, they don't do stories that they do some stories well, and some stories they don't do well. So there's really going to be no story to a lot of these matches. It's going to be just off the wall, holy shit matches. You're going to see Will Ospreay do his thing. The only story that you have is John Moxley versus Bryan Danielson. Otherwise, you don't really have anything there. So I do want to talk about this issue of special shows. That the problem with special shows is that I understand that Tony's trying to push the ratings, and that's important too. You have to do anything to get ratings, but as Eric Bischoff said, and this is true, the way you get ratings is by good stories, by being experimental to have good stories. You don't push ratings by having so many special shows, because the problem is that if you always do it, you get a diminishing return. And then the other thing is that if every single week is a special show, or you do 3 or 4 special shows, that's way too much oversaturation. Like honestly, like the Grand Slam show was excellent, but you look at what's happening with the Dynamite show, that you have two big problems. You have Ricochet versus Will Ospreay, it's not a good match at all. It's not a good match at all because this is not the right venue to have it. The right venue to have it is at All In 2025. You don't have Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant on the first episode. Let's say if Vince McMahon started the WWE television show in the 1980s, you don't have the first episode or the second episode or the third episode with Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant the first time you ever do it. You're going to have that at a WrestleMania. The same way in WCW, you're not going to have Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair on television. You're not going to do that. The first time would be at maybe your biggest pay-per-view of the year. If you're going to do Shawn Michaels versus AJ Styles, you're going to do something like have that at a WrestleMania. You're not going to have that on an NXT show. When you have the Motor City Machine Guns, you're not going to do something like, you're not going to take like 2 wrestlers, like maybe like a Rey Mysterio and another like very flippy wrestler, and you're not going to have that match at on NXT. You're going to actually have that either at an NXT show, or maybe you do something where NXT has a show at Las Vegas, during WrestleMania weekend. Then you're going to have like Motor City Machine Guns, maybe versus the New Day, or another team that's like very high octane, or maybe like a Rey Mysterio, a veteran who could still go and whatever. Like if you did if you did something like if they had Dustin Rhodes, if you did Dustin Rhodes and Rey Mysterio versus the Motor City Machine Guns, if they were all in WWE, you would have that at a WrestleMania. You would not put that on a special on an NXT show. The same way on a Dynamite show, that's probably going to draw maybe 800,000 people. That's not a good place to put Ricochet and Will Ospreay. That's a very bad place. Like I've said, you need to kind of have, like as Vince talked in this documentary, if you have these legendary matches, you need to make it feel legendary. You need to have the right venue, the right story, the right place to make it great. And I understand it's a little bit scary because sometimes you're going to have a situation, just like with Austin when he got pile drivered by Owen Hart, where you may be in a situation where you have this great storyline, and then it's like up in the air because someone gets injured or whatever, but that's part of the business, or you have to think about other people that can take their places. But I'm actually doing a video about like Ospreay and Ricochet storyline. But what I will say is that 100% that I do think that one of the big issues with AEW is really a huge lack of cutting down their special shows, because sometimes you're going to throw these pay-per-view caliber matches or this, WrestleMania caliber match on a regular show, and that's not what you do. That's very bad business. And I also will say that, the problem is that if you do that, these matches are not special. Like MJF versus Will Ospreay. Imagine if they did the exact same match, that right choreography, and they said something like, we're going to do a segment on the 250 episode show in Little Rock, Arkansas, but everything that they did, we're going to repeat it we're going to save that all for All In. And they did some choreography where they're fighting the crowds, and the match went an hour, and then they said, okay, we're going to take some of the matches on All In that are not as appealing. Like maybe you do something like, say we have special start time, so you take the Von Erichs and Dustin, or you take like the 12-man team and then you put it on Dynamite or something like that. Or you take like maybe you take some people off the card that really shouldn't be having matches. Like I know Britt Baker and Mercedes Moné, you take that and you put that on the Dynamite show, because you're kind of like, okay, we'd rather have that there, because obviously what's going to draw money, MJF and Will Ospreay, or is it going to be Mercedes Moné versus Britt Baker? Put that on free television. So, I think that they blow off a lot of pay-per-view caliber matches, and then they make justifications to say, okay, you're going to see a series of that. And each time you do it, it has a diminishing return. But the other issue with that is, you want to build up to those things to make the biggest money, to make the biggest noise and everything like that. And then the storyline's going to captivate people for weeks. You get more leverage by making these things long-term, really. So that's one of the big issues with special shows, that they really just blow all these really pay-per-view caliber matches or these WrestleMania caliber matches on regular television. The second thing is, it just doesn't matter anymore, because, for example, Grand Slam comes once a year. The anniversary shows come once a year, but you have something like Battle of the Belts, which I think you're almost at Battle of the Belts like 13 or 14. Like, none of the Battle of the Belts was appealing. I know in the beginning people just had more trust in it, but they're all terrible. The only thing that they ever did that was good was that they actually had Dustin Rhodes become the six-man tag team champions. That's the only time with Battle of the Belts, in my opinion, that was great. And also, if you look at Battle of the Belts, if I'm correct, I think over 95% of the time when a title was on the line, it never changed hands. The majority of the time has been a vacated title. But they also do two things. They have you have to be the champion twice. Because they do that in Japanese wrestling. You have to be the champion twice to get the title. You beat Okada, then now Okada is going to have a match with you at Wrestle Dream. You beat him, you have to beat him twice. And most people don't win that. And then the other thing that happens is that a majority of the time people don't change titles, because, obviously, because they pick so many bad times to do that. Like, you should not be having a title Tuesday right before your Wrestle Dream pay-per-view, because, again, if you did something like you change the title, like, for example, if you had if you did something like if you had Pac, Yuta, and Claudio versus Private Party on Title Tuesday, and then you take the titles off of them and you put it on Private Party, and then you're like, okay, well, they're going to have a rematch, and this time Yuta better do his part, really, or they're going to force Yuta in that match to do a lot of offense. Yeah, you can tell a good story, but then we're seeing two of the same matches within a week, really. So I do think that, honestly, a Battle of the Belts or a Battle of the Belts would obviously work once a year. I think you need to do that in January, because nobody really wants to go to pay-per-views in January because it's all freezing and everything like that. So you do that in January, it should be Battle of the Belts. You don't do that randomly in the year and then also shoehorn it in between pay-per-views. I think one thing I'm very proud of and is that they're having a Grand Slam pay-per-view in February. I'm very proud of that, because I think next year they should not have a Grand Slam show, and they should not have an anniversary show. They should do something like AEW anniversary, anniversary. That should be the Arthur Ashe show, or that should be it, really. Instead of having it the second week, I'm having it the final week of September. You have it the first week of October, and that should be your thing. Every single year, we go to Arthur Ashe Stadium to celebrate our anniversary. in February, it's the Grand Slam pay-per-view. And I think that then they're fine that way. And then you have Battle of the Belts, and Battle of the Belts is every January because most people do not want to see a pay per view in January. The U.S. is not a good unless you do it in the South, where it's all sunny. But then there's people like me who visit who fly to every AEW show. So that's also another reason why it's good to just not have Battle of the Belts every couple of weeks. You can turn that into a January pay per view, or you can kind of turn that into a special show in January. And I also will say that that the other issue is that it really hurts their creativity because I've had a lot of good ideas of how to transition from Battle of the Belts to a pay per view, or like how all four shows you need to have. All four shows, if you're going to have 4 or 5 special shows and 2 pay-per-views in a period of a month or in a period of 4 or 5 weeks, really, I know how to transition through that, but it's a very similar formula. Like certain people win, certain people lose. And then what you also do is that when people lose, it builds a storyline where they feud with other people, or when people win, they challenge other people, or you do a rematch. But it's not a good formula because the thing is that you have to rush through a lot of storytelling. You also have to utilize your television a lot better, and that's one of the issues is that you look at shows like Collision. Sometimes they have 8 or 9 matches on Collision and no story. You look at Ring of Honor, which is terrible because sometimes there's no story in that. And you look at Rampage and there's no story within that. It's just match after match really. So you have to kind of like have like a storyline. I'll say this that. With Grand Slam, I would have had that they had Collision Grand Slam. So I would have done Pac, Claudio, and Yuta versus Private Party. And then what happens is that they beat Private Party. And then at Title Tuesday, Private Party saying, you know what, if we lose one more time against these people, we're out of the company. When our contracts are up, our contracts are up. And then what happens is Yuta screws over the Moxley faction, and then what happens is that Private Party wins the titles, and then they actually feud with Top Flight because Top Flight wants to feud with them, and that would be like an opener of Wrestle Dream, of Wrestle Dream. They say we're inspired by Antonio Inoki. He's somebody who fought hard. He never gave up. He's resilient. So we want to do that. And also they're saying something like, okay, we don't want to be facing like Moxley's faction because everybody's sick of repeats. This is like the first time we ever face each other. Private Party, versus Top Flight. Are you there for the party? Are you there for the party on the bus? Or are you there for the party in the ring or the party in the air? What's going to win, the party in the ring or the party in the air? If you did something like that at Wrestle Dream, that would be really, really great. And then it wouldn't bother me if you had a Private Party versus Top Flight one more time at Battle of the Belts, really, because that's not going to be a show that's going to draw a big number. So they have one more challenge, and then maybe at Full Gear they face like another trios team, and maybe like Christian Cage and Luchasaurus and Nick Wayne, because Christian Cage would kind of inspire them to bring the best out of themselves. He would get under their skin. That would be the way to do it. But they're not going to do that storyline. And then with that storyline that I gave you, I would have Pac versus... I would have Claudio versus Wheeler Yuta. That would be a really great match. And I would also have Pac be obsessed with getting gold. So you could do Pac versus Okada. Or you could do, Pac versus somebody else. I think I would do Pac versus Okada, or I would do Pac versus Takeshita, or I would even do something like I would have Pac, Takeshita, and Okada have a match, like a triple threat match with each other, over the Continental title, really, and then put Pac in the Continental Classic and Okada in the Continental Classic. No, put Pac in the Continental Classic, put Okada in it, and then Takeshita. And really what Pac's journey is that he wants to win gold. And he wants to bring gold to his family. He wants to bring gold to the John Moxley faction, and John Moxley's cool with it. That would be the way to do it. Or you could do something where Wheeler Yuta is like, to hell with them. And then you can kind of set up a match for a Dynamite where you have Wheeler Yuta and Bryan Danielson versus Moxley and Claudio or Pac. Really, they could set up all those things really. But what I gave you is a good storyline. But AEW probably doesn't have the people on board that would kind of make that storyline out of that, because that would flow and that would make sense and all that. And then the other issue is a little bit of overexposure, because the other problem is that with Will Ospreay, I think what I would do, and I have a storyline that I'll give you guys, is that I think that next week's show, they should not have the match. Ricochet should attack Will Ospreay. Ospreay gets so badly injured that he doesn't have a match on Wrestle Dream. But then you have Ricochet versus Hologram for the vacated international title, and that's just how far you take it. And then Ospreay has a match at Full Gear, and I would have it so Powerhouse Hobbs and other members of Don Callis family attack him. So you do Powerhouse Hobbs versus, or Kyle Fletcher versus Will Ospreay at Full Gear. And then at World's End, you may have Powerhouse Hobbs versus Will Ospreay. And then you have Ricochet versus all of Will Ospreay's former opponents. So I think that would be, a really great story. But again, that would be a more compelling story than just blowing that match at a special show. But I do think that what I do hope, and I think what they're doing with AEW next year, is that I appreciate them doing an Australian show. I appreciate them doing a London show. I appreciate them maybe taking their pay-per-view out, their all-in show out of London, but bringing it to the U.S., because obviously Texas is a really great crowd. They're also going to places that they've never been to before. They've never been to Australia. They've never been to Texas for a pay-per-view. You can't just have Ring of Honor shows. You need to have a big deal type of thing in Texas. So, with all that said, really, I would say that 100% that like this cutting down special shows, spacing out pay-per-views, that needs to be the thing for 2025. AEW just has to work on getting bigger and better. I think that, as Mr. B said, that, the way to success is that you do something 1,000 times, and every time you do it, you figure out a way to get better. And that's going to lead Tony Khan to the road to success, really. I think complacency will always hurt him. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are starting to not like Tony Khan, that he does show a level of complacency. And that's not what you do, because that's what happened to Dixie Carter. That's what happened to Eric Bischoff. Just keep growing and expanding and being like, okay, that was a failed experiment. We're not doing that again. You look at WrestleMania 2. What happened was that was a bad experiment to have 3 WrestleManias in different cities, but they decided to have one mega event and one mega match at the Pontiac Silverdome with Andre and Hogan. Then they realized that was the formula. You have one mega match that people want to see, and you spend WrestleMania season from January all the way until March and April building up to those things. So Vince learned from his failure, and he learned a lot from it. And I think AEW needs to learn from that failure. And the Battle of the Belts thing is failing AEW. Having back-to-back weeks of special events is failing AEW. And then also just realizing that, if it is like a show of it's our 300th episode or our 350th episode, it's our anniversary, or it's our Grand Slam show, there's ways to consolidate that. And there's ways to say, okay, Battle of the Belts is going to be the January pay-per-view, and I think that's what it should be. And I also think that Grand Slam needs to be at the February pay-per-view. Have it in an international area. Always do that in Canada, or maybe Mexico, or maybe in France or another country. But obviously they have to look at the markets, and they have to just, look at where the paper is going to sell. And if the U.S. is better, then, you have it in Texas, or have it in, Florida, or even have it in, Albuquerque or New Mexico, or SoCal or another place. That would be really, really good. So just keep just figuring out the formula, really. And then that's going to lead them to the road to success, really. Or they can even have that in New Orleans, or they can have that in New Orleans or Oklahoma, or one of the states that don't get as bad in January with weather. So that could be an option, or just have that as a special television show. But they really need to get rid of all these special TV programmings, and they need to consolidate it. And then with battle, and as I said, with Grand Slam, Arthur Ashe, that needs to go away. You need to have AEW. Our anniversary show is going to be at Arthur Ashe Stadium, and then you move Wrestle Dream maybe like a week or two ahead of time in October, or maybe up another week, really. And then, as I said, that it needs to be a transition from that special event into the show, into Wrestle Dream. So like as I said, I think that they're fixing their weaknesses in AEW. They need to pick up the pace on that. But I do feel that there's a lot of improvement, and one of the big improvements is that they have an issue with way too many special shows, and they need to fix that sooner than later.